Canon or Sony? Which one of these has better stabilization? But first, we need to go somewhere where we can actually test it. Now, if you had asked me in the past who had the better stabilization, I would have said Canon, hands down. They've had incredible stabilization in their cameras and lenses for decades. Sony, pretty good stabilization. And even though I was shooting Sony for the last 7 or 8 years, their stabilization was always a little frustrating. But in the last couple of years, last couple of bodies, they've been putting in much better stabilization. So I have the A9III, which is one of the most current bodies, and the R5II, also one of the most current bodies. And we're going to put to test the stabilization between these two cameras in long lenses. I have the 100-500 and the 100-400. So they're best long lenses that they offer in this focal range, but also in the shorter handheld range, because while Canon has stabilization built into all of their L series lenses, all the way from the 10-20, the 15-35 and on up, Sony does not. They only have stabilization in the 70-200 and up in their their GM series lenses. In the smaller lenses, you have to step down to a G series lens to get stabilization in some of them. But on the other hand, Canon has had issues with wobbles and artifacting in the corners, the outside corners of their cameras and lenses. So let's get started. So now I'm only going to use, even though this has up to 500, I'm only going to use 400, and we're going to go straight out to 400, and we're going to start with no stabilization at all. So you can see that right here. And then as soon as I turn stabilization on, that makes a big difference. Now that's just mechanical image stabilization. So let's then turn the first level of digital stabilization on. Right there. And that is the first level of digital stabilization. And now let's go to the highest level of digital stabilization, which does crop in a fair amount. So you definitely lose some of your field of view, but here it is. That is pretty dang good, Canon. Jeez. Okay, but they also have different modes on all their lenses. This is for more just handheld stable shots. We're gonna put into mode 2, which is for when you're panning left and right. Something you would use if you're chasing a boat or something out there, or birds through the sky. You would want to be able to follow them as you're moving left and right. And that should give you smoother left to right pans. So again, here it is. Just mechanical stabilization. And now let's put on the first level of digital. The first level of digital. And this is the highest level of digital. All right, A9III. Let's see what it can do. 100-400 GM. We're gonna go out to 400. And we're gonna see just how good this is. No stabilization at all, mode 1. Let's, here we go. I do love the A9III, it's such a great camera. So here's no stabilization at all, and then you can see when I flip it on, there we go. Now that is obviously quite a bit better. Makes a big difference there. Still some shakes and jitters, but that might just be me having too much coffee. So now let's turn on the first level of digital stabilization. There we go. It's quite a bit better, but you can see how it's kind of jumpy. That's because we're in mode 1, which is optimized for just a stable shot, not moving left or right. Let's put the second level on. There's a second level of digital stabilization. Again, you crop in quite a bit, but that gives you a lot more stable footage for handheld. But in my experience, because I had the 100 to 400 and I used it a lot when I shot with the A1 quite a bit, and my experience was that the panning left to right wasn't nearly as good on Sony. So let's try mode 2, panning left to right. Again, just standard stabilization, panning left to right. It's, well, that's pretty good actually, not too bad. Now let's put it in digital. Active, here we go. So this is mechanical plus digital. It's a little jerky. Well, actually it's quite a bit jerky. Not very smooth. Not as smooth as Canon, in my opinion. I'll put them side by side here in a sec. And then here we go with the active. Again, crops in quite a bit. And it's pretty, it's a little better, but it's still kind of jerky. But before any of you call me out as a fanboy, I still shoot with Sony. I can't shoot with Canon. I am really brand agnostic. It's whatever camera works best. Here they are side by side though. You can see Canon on the left, Sony on the right, same exact settings. What do you think? And before we go any farther, you need to know that I don't work with Sony, I don't work with Canon. I have purchased every single Sony product that I own and use, and I've purchased all the Canon gear that I use. The Sony gear I'm actually renting from my local camera shop, Stewart's Photo in Anchorage. Awesome people. If you're ever in Anchorage and need some camera gear, amazing. And actually they ship around the country. If you're looking to buy something and you can't find it in stock anywhere, check Stewart's, they might have it. Not sponsored by them, but I just thought it'd be interesting to compare both of these systems and see which one does better. Stabilization in really long lenses is obviously super important, especially if you shoot handheld, wildlife, stuff like that. But one area where I think Sony definitely was winning over Canon is in wider lenses when it comes to handheld stabilization, because Canon has always had, at least since the R5 was introduced, they've had these kind of weird artifacts and wobbles out on the side and in really wide angle glass. Now that's been improved with the newer cameras, but let's start with the 24 to 105 on both cameras and see how that looks, and then we'll go and get to wider lenses. All right. So now we're handheld, and this is mechanical stabilization only at 24 millimeters. How's it look? And now we're handheld with the first level of digital stabilization. How's that looking? Not bad, right? And now we're handheld with the highest level of digital stabilization. 24 millimeters obviously crops in quite a bit, and it's a little on the tight side. So now we've got the A9 III with the 24 to 105, which is also optically stabilized, just like the Canon. I think this is probably one of my most used lenses, both on Canon and Sony, just because it's super versatile for like run and gun stuff. Now we're on the Sony with just optical image stabilization in the lens and in the body. So it does a pretty good job. So now we're on the Sony with the first level of digital image stabilization, but of course, all the new Sony bodies have one more level of stabilization. And now we're on Sony with the highest level of digital stabilization, dynamic active or whatever they call it. Very impressive, but again, quite a bit of crop in. Let's put an ultra wide, the 12 to 24 GM on the Sony, and we'll put the 10 to 20 on the Canon. Now this is where Canon has typically fallen short. So this is the Canon 10 to 20 right now with just digital stabilization. I'm gonna stop it down to like f14 because holy crap, it's bright out. At 10 millimeters. We're gonna go to 12 millimeters to match up field of view with Sony when we start working with that. But this is just optical stabilization, no digital stabilization. So this is the first level of digital stabilization with mechanical stabilization. How are the corners looking as we move around? I mean, obviously this lens is insanely wide, so there's gonna be all kinds of warping. But let's turn the extreme level of digital on. And this is the highest level of digital stabilization. So you've got 20% crop, but we're on ridiculously wide lenses, so it's not gonna matter. How's that look? Not bad, huh? Hey, if you're getting value out of or enjoying this video, then consider subscribing. I go out and test, compare equipment in the harshest, most real-world conditions here in Alaska, where I live, and I give you tips and tutorials on how to use your equipment. So now we have the A9III with the 12 to 24 millimeter. I mean, look at that. Look at that lens. And honestly, with super wide lenses like this, you barely need stabilization anyway, just because the field of view is ridiculously wide. But unlike the Canon super ultra wide, this does not have stabilization built in. So I'm curious to see how that interacts. It should get rid of the wobbles at the corner of the screen and make it smoother. But right now, we're gonna start off with just in-body stabilization. So this is Sony with just in-body stabilization. Now, I've got the shutter speed ramped up because I don't have ND filters for this stuff. And but how's it looking? Handheld, 12 millimeters. Not too bad, right? And now this is the Sony with digital and IBIS. So this should be a little bit better stabilization. It should, you know, give it a little smoother look. How's the corners looking? They wobble. And now this is the Sony with the highest level of stabilization available, dynamic active. So like it should be insanely good. And even at 12 millimeters, even though we're cropping in 20%, like on a 12 millimeter lens, it shouldn't really matter. So how's that look? And now just for fun, I'm gonna play the clips side by side so you can kind of see the differences between them. I think overall right now, I would put Canon in the lead, maybe on stabilization, just because you have the option in so many different lenses, so many different cameras. You don't even get the option for stabilization in the G Master lenses on anything on the 24 to 70, the 15 to 35, or this 12 to 24. You only have digital stabilization. That could be a plus or minus depending on what you're shooting with and how you shoot. But there is an area where Sony is killing it on stabilization. It does take an extra bit of work in post, but you can get some phenomenal results. Let me show you. The thing where Sony is killing it is their cameras record gyro data internally and put it as part of the metadata. So if you turn off all the stabilization, there's metadata included in the video file that you can use then with Sony's Catalyst Browse or third-party programs like GyroFlow and get perfectly stabilized, really smooth handheld shots. So this is just handheld walking, no stabilization. But then if I turn on the post-stabilized file right here, this is what you get. Again, you get this just insanely smooth, really nice footage. It's an extra step, but it does give you some really good results. If you want really smooth handheld footage, you can't do that with Canon. At least you can't do it just as is. You have to include an external gyro recording device that records the gyro data externally and then sync those in post. It's a much larger pain. Where Sony, it's built into the metadata of the video, and with Sony, the Catalyst Browse software, you can turn it on and off and you get this incredibly good stabilized footage. So I don't know about you, but after looking at all those and extensive testing of these two camera systems, I think it's pretty clear that the winner is, well, that's a bummer. My battery died. But next you're gonna watch this video right here. I'll see you over there. Let me know in the comments below which one you think won and if you have any other questions. Or you can join my live stream, which happens most Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern, where we can have more of a conversation and I can answer questions that maybe I didn't get to in this video. I'll see you again soon in the next one. Cheers.